think about implementation in more detail. We're actually jumping now to 1915, to a very important new stage in X-rays, but it's useful for thinking about implementation. So initially, to remind you, you'd have an X-ray set up with each doctor. You would convince a doctor, say who was dealing with broken bones, that this would be a useful tool and one that he would use a lot, and so you would be able to sell an X-ray setup to this doctor. By 1915, we're having a completely different kind of scale. This is now, I'm now describing a much larger market for X-rays, and don't forget that this is really almost 20 years after they were first discovered. But what had emerged by 1915 was a house like this on the right, which is a radiological department, and it was centralized. This is a purpose-built house. So architects had designed it to work for radiology, and so this is really much more expensive than just selling an X-ray setup. To invest in X-rays here from the perspective of the hospital was not just that you had to buy batteries and induction coils and X-ray tubes, but you had to buy, in addition to the technology, you had to actually build a new building. So much higher fixed costs, but as I'll show you, the point is that you can also have much higher throughput, much higher efficiency if you want. And here we can see the position of the radiological department in this hospital. This is a hospital in Hamburg, in Germany, the Allgemeines Krankenhaus St. Georg, so the St. George Hospital in Hamburg. And you can see pretty much in the middle of the hospital campus is a square building, and that is the radiology department. The position in the middle of the campus makes sense because you have traffic flowing to and from the radiological department. It caters to several customers. Let's say you have the bone specialists or you have the lung specialists who would sit in different buildings throughout the university, at the hospital campus here. But if they needed to have an X-ray done, they would not do it in their own building, but they would send the patient over to the radiology building. So you had patients moving to the radiology building and then back again. So all the radiology technology, all the X-ray technology was housed in this one building. And so maybe you can sense now that the doctors, the bone specialists, etc., they're sort of losing control a little bit here. They're giving something away to be done elsewhere, and that's something to think about for implementation. And here we have one of the rooms on the ground floor of the radiology department, and it's a very important room. What happens is that the X-ray photographs that were taken of the patients would be developed, and then they would be put up in the windows to the outside. So this is actually, just like nowadays in hospitals, when X-ray photos are taken, they're put up on with a backlight. But in those days, this was novel. People hadn't thought of a backlight, and it wasn't really. It just seemed much easier at the time just to put them up in windows, and then you would have the daylight provide the backlight. Of course, it doesn't work at night, but it just goes to show, then you can only work this during the day. But it was a novelty, and the point is here, this room, which is actually called a museum, it's not what we think of as a museum, but never mind. Both in English and in German, this was called a museum at the time. But in this museum, you have the medical specialists, the bone specialists, and so on. They would come and discuss with the radiologists together, and they would come up with a diagnosis on the basis of the X-ray photograph together. And this is the kind of compromise that allows the bone specialists, etc., to remain in control of their own diagnoses. And if they had not done this, these medical doctors might have been hostile to the new technology. So this kind of architecture here makes for compromises that enables the technology to be accepted. So here we have a schematic diagram of the ground floor of the radiological department. The room we've just been looking at is on the right-hand side. You can see it says museum. And to the left of it, you can see the German word Vorplatz, which is sort of anteroom. And this is so that the patients come in through the main building, go up the stairs or take a lift up into the anteroom, and then they can go left into the Warteraum, which is the waiting room. And in the top left corner, we have the diagnostic room, which is where the X-ray tubes are positioned, and there are beds there, and you can see here in the schematic drawing that the beds are on rails. Now, the point is here that when you have the patients ready, so they're in the waiting room, you can refill the bed where the X-ray photograph is being taken immediately. So you get one photograph done with one patient, the patient leaves, and then the next patient comes in. So this is about maximizing throughput. So the building enables maximal throughput, and of course that way also maximal income. And this is what the diagnostic room looks like. You can see the beds are on rails, and above the bed in this picture you can see the X-ray tube, and the X-ray tube is also sat on actually on ratchets, so that you can move the X-ray tube into a very particular position and you can record exactly where it is. So it's really important to be able to adjust the position and adjust the patient, and the photograph, so the photographic plate is under the bed here, and in very particular in a very particular geometry, which you can record, so that later when you need to interpret the photograph, you know exactly what it is that you've done, and also in terms of the labor, this makes things quite easy, because the patient comes in, you plot the patient on the bed, you adjust the X-ray tube, and then the operator goes off into behind a screen, a little small room behind a screen, presses a button, and then the photograph is taken. And this matters because it's a comparatively simple routine. It doesn't involve any great expertise. You don't need to know anything much about X-rays or diseases. You just need to put the tube in the right ratchet and go in and press the button, and end the story. That means that this labor can be delegated to assistants, and they're cheaper than medical doctors. Another point to the architecture is that you could have a central high voltage supply now inside the building. And this high voltage supply, so now we're not talking about induction coils anymore, by the way. This is instead of induction coils. The high voltage is also something that is developed in the electrical industry in general, because the electrical grid was beginning to come into being with high voltage transmission, and so the technology was being developed for other purposes, and X-ray the field of radiology took advantage of that and had this installed in new kinds of technologies with transformers and so on in this building here. And then from the building you could lead the current out into several X-ray tubes in the building, which again means that you can power many X-ray machines simultaneously. Again, you can enhance the throughput of patients and you can increase income. And I should add that really in this photo you might be able to see there on the right that is actually an induction coil. So they had the old technology in there also. Do a small kind of wrap up here and take some or mention some take-home lessons before we move on. So what you need to think about is the concrete constituencies around a technology. Who will buy and why? And we've been talking about some of them in the case of the X-rays here, but these are general questions that always come up as you innovate. How much effort do you need to make your potential customers aware and to convince them, right? Think of it in this case, there was a lot of work that needed to be done to make the medical doctors aware, to convince them that this was a useful thing, and even the procurement departments of hospitals. This might actually be harder than developing the technology itself. Remember that new perspectives on your technology will likely emerge along the way. For example, something that I've just mentioned is that as transmission, high voltage transmission developed for the grid in general, this made a difference for the X-ray technology. So new perspectives on the technology will emerge. And even concepts and labels change. And I will actually talk about this more in a minute. It's important, if you are in a startup company, to combine markets and give yourself a leg up. So very often a startup is faced with the ability to enter some niche market and make some money. There may not be much future in this market, but it gets a revenue going. Once you have a little bit of revenue going, you can then work on a larger market. And that's what is meant here by giving yourself a leg up. It's really important to start off early with some kind of revenue that can actually keep you going until you can get stronger in a more interesting and larger market. And as I just said, now I'm repeating myself, I apologize, but I just said it, implementation can be more problematic than technology. This is particularly important to remember for engineers and scientists, and this is a lecture at MIT after all. Engineers and scientists tend to focus on the technology, and in the process of innovation it is definitely the case that implementation can be more problematic than the technology.